They had no idea that the black man they just humiliated and escorted off campus in handcuffs was actually the billionaire chairman who controlled their entire university's future. When Dr. Elijah Grant walked into Whitmore University dressed in simple clothes to secretly evaluate their failing diversity program, he was immediately treated like a criminal by the very people whose salaries he signed. The receptionist called security within minutes. The program coordinator publicly accused him of disrupting her classroom, and the dean had him physically removed from the building while students recorded everything. But 37 minutes later, when Dr. Grant returned in a tailored suit flanked by university trustees, the shocking identity reveal would destroy careers, expose systematic discrimination, and trigger the most dramatic transformation in higher education history. What happens next will restore your faith in justice and prove that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones you least expect. This is the story of how one man's humiliation became an entire institution's reckoning, and why you should never judge someone by their appearance, because you never know who's really in charge. They had no idea that the man they were about to humiliate controlled their entire future. Dr. Elijah Grant stepped out of his modest Honda Civic, adjusting his simple jeans and worn sneakers as he gazed up at the towering limestone facade of Whitmore University's prestigious business school. The same building where 15 years ago he'd walked these halls as one of only 12 black students in his MBA program. The same building where professors had questioned his intelligence, where classmates had assumed he was there on charity, where he'd sworn he'd one day return to change everything. Today, that day had finally arrived, but nobody knew it yet. As the newly appointed chairman of Whitmore's Board of Trustees, Dr. Grant had the power to reshape this institution with a single decision. His tech company, Grant Innovations, had revolutionized artificial intelligence in healthcare, making him one of the youngest billionaires in America. More importantly, his foundation now funded 40% of Whitmore's diversity programs, including the struggling accelerator program he'd come to evaluate today. The program that was either going to transform this university or disappear entirely, depending on what he discovered in the next few hours. But here's what made this moment so perfectly calculated. He'd deliberately kept his appointment secret from everyone except the university president and 2 senior trustees. No photos had been released, no announcements made. To every professor, administrator, and student on this campus, he was just another black man who didn't belong in their exclusive world. And that anonymity was exactly what he needed to see the truth about how Whitmore University really treated people who looked like him. The irony wasn't lost on him. 15 years ago, he'd been dismissed and underestimated in these same halls. Now, he held the financial future of this institution in his hands, and they were about to treat him exactly the same way. The difference was, this time, he had the power to do something about it. Dr. Grant pulled out his phone, checking the time. The Diversity Accelerator program was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. A program designed to mentor young entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities. A program that, according to the reports he'd been receiving, was failing spectacularly. Students were dropping out, complaints were mounting, and the very people the program was meant to help were feeling more alienated than ever. The question was this failure due to lack of resources, poor leadership, or something far more sinister? Something that went to the heart of why institutions like Whitmore University struggled to create real change, even when they had all the money and good intentions in the world. As he walked toward the main entrance, Dr. Grant felt the familiar weight of being watched, judged, and found wanting before he'd even spoken a word. The security guard's eyes lingered on him a moment too long. A group of students glanced up from their phones, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something less welcoming. Even the groundskeeper paused in his work, tracking his movement across the quad. This was the test, not just for Whitmore University, but for every institution that claimed to value diversity while maintaining systems that pushed people like him to the margins. In the next hour, he would discover whether the university that had taken his money was ready to embrace the change it promised, or whether it would reveal its true nature when faced with someone who didn't look like he belonged. The only question now was, would they pass or fail? If you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how they look or where they come from, smash that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me about a time when someone underestimated you because of your appearance. And don't forget to subscribe because this story is about to get a whole lot more intense, and you won't want to miss what happens when Dr. Grant walks through those doors. Right at that moment, as Dr. Grant approached the gleaming glass doors of the business school, the first test began in the most predictable way possible. The receptionist, a middle-aged white woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a nameplate reading Mrs. Patterson, looked up from her computer screen. Her welcoming smile, the one she'd been trained to give every visitor, flickered and died the instant her eyes met his. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Her posture stiffened, her fingers hesitated over the keyboard, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a tone that Dr. Grant had heard 1,000 times before. "Can I help you, sir?" The word "sir" hung in the air like a question mark, loaded with doubt about whether he truly deserved the courtesy. This was the moment of truth. Not a dramatic confrontation, not an obvious act of racism, but something far more insidious. The kind of everyday discrimination that happened in micro moments, in shifted tones and suspicious glances. The kind that people could deny later, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. Dr. Grant smiled warmly, his voice calm and professional. "Good morning. I'm here to observe the Diversity Accelerator program. I understand there's a session starting soon." He deliberately kept his request simple, straightforward, giving her every opportunity to treat him with basic respect. Instead, Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows furrowed as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. "The diversity program?" She said the words like they left a bad taste in her mouth. "Are you enrolled in the program? Do you have an appointment? Because we don't usually allow random people to just walk in and observe our classes." Random people. The phrase hit exactly as intended. Doctor. Grant watched her eyes dart nervously around the lobby, as if she was looking for backup, for someone to validate her suspicions that this black man in casual clothes didn't belong in her pristine academic environment. "I'm just interested in seeing how the program operates," he replied, maintaining his composure even as he felt the familiar burn of being treated like a potential threat. "Perhaps you could direct me to the classroom, or let me know who I should speak with." But Mrs. Patterson wasn't listening anymore. She was already reaching for her phone, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "Security? Hi, it's Patricia at the front desk. We have a situation. There's a man here asking about the diversity program, and he seems a bit lost. Could you send someone over?" Lost. As if a successful black man couldn't possibly have a legitimate reason to be on a university campus, as if his very presence was evidence of confusion or worse. Dr. Grant felt a surge of the old anger, the same fury he'd carried as a student when professors assumed he was unprepared, when classmates acted surprised by his insights, when everyone around him seemed to believe his success was an accident. But this time was different. This time, he had power. This time, he could do something about it. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I think there might be some confusion. I'm simply interested in the program. There's no need for security." Mrs. Patterson's response was to turn away from him entirely, speaking in hushed tones to someone on the phone. "No, he's still here. He's asking a lot of questions about our programs. I think you should come down just to be safe." Just to be safe. From what? From a man asking polite questions about a diversity program? The irony was breathtaking, and Dr. Grant realized he was witnessing exactly why the program was failing. How could an institution truly support diversity when its front desk treated black visitors like potential criminals? The test was already revealing its results, and they were more damning than he'd expected. But the humiliation was just getting started. Dr. Grant had barely made it past the reception desk when the real power players decided to make their entrance. Despite Mrs. Patterson's obvious hostility, he'd managed to locate the Diversity Accelerator classroom on the third floor. The door was open, and inside, he could see about 15 young entrepreneurs, mostly students of color, seated in a semicircle as a white woman in her 40s gestured enthusiastically at a whiteboard covered in buzzwords about inclusive innovation. Dr. Grant stepped quietly into the back of the room, hoping to observe the program he was funding without disruption. For exactly 30 seconds, he thought he might actually get to see how his money was being used. Then the program coordinator, Miss Jennifer Walsh, according to the nameplate on her desk, noticed him. The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate and electric. Miss Walsh stopped mid-sentence, her marker hovering over the whiteboard as her eyes locked onto Dr. Grant. The students turned to follow her gaze, and suddenly every person in the room was staring at the black man who dared to enter their space uninvited. "Excuse me," Miss Walsh said, her voice cutting through the classroom like a blade. "Can I help you? This is a closed session." The emphasis on closed made it clear that his presence was not just unwelcome, but somehow inappropriate. The students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the tension but unsure of its source. Dr. Grant raised his hand in a peaceful gesture. "I apologize for the interruption. I'm just observing. Please continue with your presentation." He kept his voice low, respectful, giving her every opportunity to handle the situation professionally. Instead, Miss Walsh set down her marker and crossed her arms. "I'm sorry, but you can't just walk into our classroom. This program is specifically designed for enrolled participants. If you're interested in our services, you'll need to go through the proper application process." The condescension in her tone was unmistakable. She was speaking to him like he was a lost undergraduate who'd wandered into the wrong building. Dr. Grant felt the familiar sting of being treated as less than, but he also felt something else. A cold, calculating anger that came from knowing exactly how this was going to end. "I understand," he replied calmly. "Perhaps you could tell me who oversees this program. I'd like to learn more about its objectives and outcomes." That's when Miss Walsh made the call that would change everything. She pulled out her phone without breaking eye contact with Dr. Grant, her fingers moving with urgent purpose. "Dean Connors? We have a situation in the diversity classroom. There's a man here who's disrupting our session. Could you come up here immediately?" Disrupting. He'd stood quietly in the back of the room for less than 2 minutes, spoken maybe 20 words total, and somehow he was disrupting their session. The irony wasn't lost on him that a program designed to support people who looked like him was treating him like a threat. Within minutes, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Dean Harold Connors appeared in the doorway, a tall, imposing man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from decades of unchallenged authority. His eyes swept the room, taking in the uncomfortable students, the agitated coordinator, and finally settling on Dr. Grant with unmistakable disapproval. "What seems to be the problem here?" Dean Connors asked, though his tone suggested he'd already decided who was at fault. The students watched in fascination and horror as the situation escalated before their eyes, phones discreetly emerging from pockets as the tension in the room reached a breaking point. Dr. Grant straightened his shoulders, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not just his fate, but the fate of every program he funded at this university. What happened next would be seared into the memory of every person in that room forever. Dean Connors stepped fully into the classroom, his presence immediately commanding attention as he surveyed the scene with the cold calculation of a man who'd handled countless disruptions before. His eyes lingered on Dr. Grant with barely concealed disdain, and when he spoke, his voice carried the full weight of institutional authority. "Sir, this is a closed program," Dean Connors announced loudly, ensuring every student could hear. "We don't allow random walk-ins to disrupt our curriculum. I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately." The word random hit like a slap. Dr. Grant stood there, the man who literally funded this program, being treated like a vagrant who'd wandered in off the street. The students shifted uncomfortably, some looking down at their phones, others staring in fascination at the unfolding drama. A few had their cameras discreetly recording, sensing that something significant was happening. Dr. Grant maintained his composure, though every fiber of his being screamed against the injustice of the moment. "I'm simply interested in learning about the program's objectives. Perhaps we could discuss this privately?" Dean Connors let out a condescending laugh that echoed through the classroom. "Discuss what, exactly? This isn't some public community event where anyone can just show up and start asking questions. This is a prestigious university program with specific enrollment requirements and security protocols." The dean's voice grew louder, more authoritative. "Frankly, I'm concerned about how you even found this classroom. Security measures exist for a reason, and we take the safety of our students very seriously." Safety. The implication was clear and devastating. Dr. Grant, a man who'd revolutionized healthcare technology and saved countless lives, was being portrayed as a potential threat to student safety. The irony was so thick, it was suffocating. Miss Walsh stepped forward, emboldened by the dean's support. "I tried to explain that he needed to go through proper channels, but he insisted on staying. Some of the students seemed uncomfortable." A few students exchanged glances, clearly questioning whether they'd appeared uncomfortable or if that was simply the narrative being constructed around them. One young woman, a black student named Keisha, looked particularly disturbed by the implication that Dr. Grant's presence had somehow threatened her. "I understand your policies," Dr. Grant said quietly, his voice steady despite the humiliation washing over him, "but I'm genuinely curious about the program's success metrics. Are you achieving the diversity goals you've set? Are the students feeling supported?" Dean Connors's face reddened with indignation. "Are you questioning how we run our programs? Are you some kind of investigator or reporter? Because if you are, you're in violation of university policy by being here under false pretenses." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Dr. Grant realized he was witnessing the exact mindset that had allowed this program to fail. Here was a diversity program being overseen by people who viewed questions about diversity as a tax, who saw a black man's presence as inherently suspicious, who couldn't imagine that someone who looked like him might have legitimate insights to offer. "I'm not a reporter," Dr. Grant replied calmly. "I'm someone who cares deeply about diversity in higher education, someone who wants to see programs like this succeed." "Well, your caring is disrupting our educational environment," Dean Connors snapped. "This isn't a public forum for your personal activism. These students are here to learn, not to be subjected to impromptu interrogations about our institutional policies." The dean pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "Campus security? This is Dean Connors. I need an escort service to the business school, room 314. We have an individual who's refusing to leave our classroom after being asked multiple times." Dr. Grant felt the familiar burn of injustice, the same feeling he'd carried as a student when professors assumed he was unprepared, when classmates questioned his intelligence, when everyone around him seemed to believe his success was an accident. But this time was different. This time, the stakes were higher. This time, he had the power to change everything. The students watched in stunned silence as security guards appeared in the doorway. Two uniformed officers, looking uncomfortable with the situation but following orders nonetheless. The lead officer, a middle-aged black man named Officer Williams according to his nameplate, approached Dr. Grant with obvious reluctance. Exactly 37 minutes later, everything changed. The black BMW with heavily tinted windows pulled up to the main entrance of Whitmore University's business school with the kind of authority that makes people stop and stare. Students gathering on the quad turned their heads, professors paused mid-conversation, and even the groundskeeping crew stopped their work to watch as the vehicle came to a smooth stop directly in front of the building. What happened next would be talked about on this campus for decades to come. The driver's door opened first, and out stepped a man in a crisp black suit who immediately moved to the rear passenger door. Then, like something out of a movie, Dr. Elijah Grant emerged from the back seat, and he was completely transformed. Gone were the casual jeans and worn sneakers. In their place was a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and a presence that commanded immediate attention. But he wasn't alone. Following closely behind him were two distinguished older gentlemen that anyone familiar with Whitmore University would recognize immediately. Dr. Richard Hamilton, the university president, a man whose face graced the cover of every university brochure and fundraising campaign, and beside him, Mr. Charles Whitmore III, great-grandson of the university's founder and the most powerful trustee on the board. The small procession moved across the courtyard with purpose, their footsteps echoing on the stone pathway as students frantically pulled out phones, sensing that something monumental was about to happen. Word spread like wildfire, through text messages and social media posts. Within minutes, dozens of students had gathered, creating an impromptu audience for whatever was about to unfold. Dr. Grant walked with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed, because in many ways, he did. His foundation's donations didn't just fund the diversity program, they underwrote scholarships, research grants, and facility improvements across the entire university. The building they were approaching had been renovated with his money. The computers in the classrooms ran on software his company had donated. The very chairs the students sat in had been purchased with funds he'd provided. As they entered the building, Mrs. Patterson looked up from her reception desk with the same welcoming smile she'd failed to give Dr. Grant less than an hour earlier. But this time, her expression shifted to one of nervous confusion as she recognized the university president. Her training kicked in immediately. "Dr. Hamilton, what an unexpected pleasure," she said, rising from her chair. "Is there anything I can help you with today?" Dr. Hamilton's response was measured but firm. "Mrs. Patterson, we need to speak with Dean Connors immediately. Please have him come to the main lobby along with Miss Walsh from the diversity program." The color drained from Mrs. Patterson's face as she processed the unusual request. Her eyes darted nervously between the three men, and Dr. Grant could see the exact moment when recognition began to dawn. She'd seen his face before, just an hour ago, when she'd called security on him for asking simple questions about university programs. "Of course, Dr. Hamilton," she stammered, reaching for her phone with trembling fingers. "Dean Connors, could you please come to the main lobby immediately? Doctor? Hamilton is here with some trustees, and they need to speak with you. Yes, right now. And could you bring Miss Walsh from the diversity program?" The lobby, which had been relatively quiet, began to fill with curious students and faculty members drawn by the unusual gathering. Word was spreading through the building that something significant was happening. Phones were discreetly recording from every angle, though none of the onlookers could have imagined what they were about to witness. Within minutes, Dean Connors appeared at the top of the main staircase, his confident stride faltering slightly as he took in the scene below. Miss Walsh followed close behind, her earlier smugness replaced by obvious confusion. They descended the stairs together, and Dr. Grant watched their faces carefully, noting the exact moment when Dean Connors' eyes met his. The recognition was instantaneous and devastating. Dean Connors' face went through a series of rapid changes: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, the pale horror of a man who realizes he's made a catastrophic mistake. Miss Walsh looked between the dean and Dr. Grant, still not understanding the full scope of what was happening, but sensing that her world was about to change forever. Dr. Hamilton stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "Dean Connors, Miss Walsh, I'd like you to meet Dr. Elijah Grant." The silence that followed was deafening. Students held their breath. Phones captured every angle, and the very air seemed to vibrate with tension. Dr. Grant stepped forward, his voice calm and clear, carrying easily through the crowded lobby. "Good afternoon, Dean Connors. Miss Walsh. I believe we've already met, though perhaps not under the best circumstances." Dean Connors's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish out of water. The man who'd been so authoritative, so confident in his power just an hour earlier, now looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. "I'm Dr. Elijah Grant," he continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "I'm the chairman of this university's board of trustees. My foundation funds 40% of your diversity programs, including the one you just escorted me out of. I sign the checks that pay your salaries, approve your budgets, and determine the future of every program in this building." The gasps from the gathered crowd were audible. Phones were raised higher, capturing every word, every expression, every moment of this unprecedented reversal of fortune. "And as of this moment, Doctor," Grant continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "the Diversity Accelerator program is suspended, pending a complete investigation into its leadership and effectiveness." The reckoning had begun. What followed next was the kind of swift, uncompromising justice that people dream about but rarely get to witness. Dr. Grant stood in the center of the lobby, surrounded by stunned faculty, recording students, and the two men who had just realized their careers were about to end. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Dr. Grant spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Let me be absolutely clear about what happened here today," he began, his words measured and deliberate. "I came to this university as the chairman of the board, funding nearly half of your diversity initiatives, and I was treated like a criminal, not because I was disruptive, not because I was inappropriate, but because I was a black man who dared to ask questions about programs designed to help people who look like me." Dean Connors finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Dr. Grant, if I had known who you were, this never would have happened. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Dr. Grant's response was immediate and devastating. "That's exactly the problem, Dean Connors. You're saying you would have treated me differently if you'd known I was wealthy and powerful. But what about every other black person who walks through these doors? What about the students in your program? What about the parents who visit this campus? Do they deserve respect only if they can prove their worth first?" The crowd around them had grown substantially. Students were filming from every angle, some live streaming to social media platforms. Faculty members who had emerged from their offices stood in shocked silence, witnessing the public dismantling of two of their colleagues. Miss Walsh, who had been standing frozen beside Dean Connors, finally spoke up. "Dr. Grant, I was just following security protocols. We can't have unauthorized people in our classrooms." Dr. Grant turned his attention to her, his expression cold and calculating. "Miss Walsh, let me share something with you. In the past 6 months, I've received 17 formal complaints about your program. 17 students of color reporting that they felt unwelcome, unsupported, and discriminated against. I came here today to see if those complaints were justified." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the crowd. "Your behavior today has answered that question definitively." Dr. Hamilton stepped forward, his face grave, with the responsibility of what came next. "Dean Connors, effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into your conduct and the management of university diversity programs." The words hit Dean Connors like a physical blow. His face went from pale to ashen, and he seemed to age 10 years in the span of 10 seconds. "Doctor Hamilton, please. I've served this university for 15 years. This is all just a misunderstanding." 15 years, Dr. Grant repeated, his voice carrying a note of bitter irony. 15 years of treating people like me as outsiders in a program designed to include us. 15 years of complaints that were ignored, of students who felt unwelcome, of a system that failed the very people it was meant to serve. Mr. Whitmore III, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward with the authority of someone whose family name was literally carved into the university's foundation stones. Miss Walsh, your employment with Whitmore University is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. The finality of the statement sent shockwaves through the crowd. Students gasped, some covered their mouths in disbelief, others continued recording with trembling hands. Miss Walsh's face crumpled as the reality of her situation hit her. "You can't do this," she said, her voice breaking. "I have tenure-track status. I have rights." Dr. Grant pulled out his phone, and the crowd leaned in to see what he was about to reveal. "Miss Walsh, you have rights, but you don't have the right to discriminate. Campus security footage shows you calling security on me within 2 minutes of my arrival. Student recordings show you making assumptions about my presence based solely on my appearance. And your own words, recorded by multiple students, demonstrate a pattern of behavior that violates this university's fundamental values." The phones in the crowd captured every moment as Dr. Grant displayed crystal-clear video footage on his screen. The timestamp showed his calm, respectful interaction with Miss Walsh, followed by her immediate and hostile response. The evidence was undeniable, devastating, and now viral. "Furthermore, Dr. Grant continued, his voice growing stronger with each revelation, an investigation of your program reveals that student retention rates have dropped 40% during your tenure. Exit interviews consistently cite feeling unwelcome and unsupported. The very students this program was designed to help are fleeing because of the environment you've created." Dean Connors made one last desperate attempt to salvage his career. "Dr. Grant, I understand you're upset, but surely we can discuss this privately. There's no need for such a public spectacle." Dr. Grant's response was swift and merciless. "A public spectacle? Dean Connors, you made this public when you had me escorted out of my own building by security guards. You made this public when you humiliated me in front of students. You made this public when you decided that a black man asking questions about diversity was somehow a threat to student safety." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. The moment had transcended a simple personnel issue and become something much more significant. A reckoning with institutional racism, a demonstration of what happens when discrimination meets consequences. "The investigation begins immediately," Dr. Grant announced, his voice carrying across the lobby with absolute authority. "Every complaint will be reviewed, every incident will be documented, and every person responsible for creating a hostile environment will be held accountable." Security guards appeared at the edges of the crowd, ready to escort the terminated employees from the building. The swift justice was both shocking and satisfying, a reminder that actions have consequences, even in the highest levels of academia. But Dr. Grant wasn't finished, not by a long shot. But Dr. Grant wasn't finished delivering justice. As the terminated employees were escorted from the building, he turned to address the crowd of students, faculty, and staff who had witnessed this unprecedented moment of accountability. His voice carried a different tone now, not the sharp edge of judgment, but the passionate conviction of a man who had the power to create lasting change. "What you've witnessed today isn't just about 2 individuals who made poor choices," he began, his words echoing through the marble lobby. "This is about a system that allowed discrimination to flourish unchecked for years. A system that took millions of dollars meant to support diversity and used it to fund programs that actively pushed away the very students they were meant to help." The crowd pressed closer, phones still recording, sensing that they were witnessing something that would reshape their university forever. Dr. Grant's presence commanded absolute attention as he outlined his vision for transformation. Effective immediately, the Diversity Accelerator program will be rebuilt from the ground up. Not reformed, not adjusted, but completely reconstructed with new leadership, new policies, and new accountability measures that ensure what happened today never happens again. Dr. Hamilton stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. Dr. Grant will be personally overseeing the selection of new program leadership. We're not just looking for credentials. We're looking for people who understand the lived experience of discrimination and have the passion to create real change. A young black woman in the crowd, one of the students who had been in the diversity program classroom earlier, raised her hand tentatively. "Dr. Grant, what about those of us who are currently in the program? What happens to us?" Dr. Grant's expression softened as he addressed her directly. "What's your name?" "Keisha Williams," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "I'm a junior in the program, and honestly, I've been thinking about dropping out. Today wasn't the first time I felt unwelcome there." The admission sent a ripple of recognition through the crowd. Other students nodded, some looking down at their phones, others exchanging meaningful glances. "Doctor." Grant felt the familiar burn of anger, but channeled it into determination. "Keisha, you and every other student in that program deserve better. Starting tomorrow, we're implementing immediate changes. First, all current students will receive full scholarships for the remainder of their time at Whitmore University. This institution failed you, and we're going to make it right." The gasps from the crowd were audible. Students pulled out phones to text parents, to call friends, to share the news that their educational futures had just been secured. "Second," Dr. Grant continued, "we're establishing a real-time reporting system through a mobile app that will allow anyone on this campus to report discrimination immediately. Not through channels that can be ignored or buried, but directly to the Board of Trustees. Every report will be investigated within 48 hours, and every resolution will be made public." Mr. Whitmore III stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of generations of family legacy. "The app will be developed by Dr. Grant's technology company and will be mandatory for all university staff and faculty. Participation in bias training will be required for continued employment." But Dr. Grant was just getting started. "Third, we're establishing a community advisory board made up of alumni, local leaders, and current students who will have oversight authority over all diversity programs. No longer will these initiatives be managed in isolation by people who don't understand the communities they're meant to serve." A professor in the crowd raised her hand, her voice carrying a note of nervousness. "Dr. Grant, what about current faculty and staff? Are we all under investigation?" Dr. Grant's response was measured but firm. "Every employee who interacted with diversity programs over the past 2 years will undergo review. But this isn't about punishment, it's about education and accountability. Those who demonstrate genuine commitment to change will receive additional training and support. Those who don't will find other opportunities elsewhere." The crowd was completely silent now, absorbing the magnitude of the transformation being announced. Dr. Grant reached into his jacket and pulled out a tablet, swiping to reveal detailed charts and statistics. "Let me share something with you," he said, his voice carrying the authority of hard data. "In the past 5 years, Whitmore University has received over $40 million in diversity funding from various sources. $40 million. Yet, your retention rates for students of color have actually decreased during that same period. Your faculty diversity has remained stagnant. Your leadership positions are still overwhelmingly held by people who look nothing like the students you claim to serve." The numbers hit the crowd like a physical blow. $40 million with declining results. The scope of the institutional failure was staggering. "But here's what's going to change," Dr. Grant continued, his voice rising with passion. "We're establishing mentorship programs led by successful alumni of color. We're creating internship pipelines with major corporations that value diversity. We're funding research opportunities that address real-world problems facing underrepresented communities." A student in the back of the crowd called out, "Dr. Grant, how do we know these changes will actually stick? How do we know this isn't just talk?" Dr. Grant smiled for the first time since entering the building. "Because I'm not going anywhere. My foundation is establishing a permanent office on this campus, with full-time staff dedicated to ensuring these programs succeed. We're not just funding diversity, we're embedding ourselves in the process to make sure it works." The transformation was breathtaking in its scope and speed. Within the span of an hour, Dr. Grant had not only delivered justice but outlined a comprehensive plan for systemic change that would impact every aspect of university life. "Finally," he said, his voice carrying the weight of personal conviction, "we're establishing the Whitmore Center for Equity and Inclusion, a research institution that will study best practices in diversity and share those findings with universities across the country. What happens here won't just change Whitmore, it will change higher education." The crowd erupted in applause, but Dr. Grant wasn't finished. There was one more announcement that would complete his vision for transformation. 6 months later, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Dr. Grant stood in the same lobby where he'd been humiliated, but everything had changed. The walls now displayed portraits of diverse alumni who had achieved remarkable success, their stories serving as inspiration for current students. The Diversity Accelerator Program, now renamed the Grant Center for Innovation and Equity, had become a model that universities across the nation were studying and implementing. The numbers told the story of true transformation. Student retention rates for underrepresented minorities had increased by 60%. Faculty diversity had doubled. Most importantly, the anonymous feedback scores from program participants had gone from an average of 2.1 out of 5 to an unprecedented 4.8 out of 5. The program that had once driven students away was now attracting applications from across the country. Dr. Grant walked through the building with quiet satisfaction, noting the changes that went far beyond statistics. In the hallways, he saw students of all backgrounds working together on projects, their conversations animated with the kind of intellectual excitement that comes from feeling truly welcome. The new program director, Dr. Maya Chen, a brilliant entrepreneur who had built 3 successful tech companies, had created an environment where innovation flourished alongside inclusion. "Dr. Grant." A familiar voice called out. He turned to see Keisha Williams, the student who had spoken up during that pivotal day 6 months ago. She approached with a confidence that hadn't been there before, her smile bright and genuine. "Keisha, how are you doing? How's the program treating you?" "It's incredible," she replied, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "I just secured funding for my startup from 3 different investors. The mentorship program connected me with alumni who actually understand my vision. For the first time since I started here, I feel like I belong." Dr. Grant felt a surge of pride, but it was tempered by the memory of how close they'd come to losing her entirely. "What's your startup focused on?" "Healthcare technology for underserved communities," she said, her eyes lighting up. "Inspired by your work, actually. I want to create diagnostic tools that can be used in areas without access to major medical facilities." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of someone Dr. Grant hadn't expected to see. Officer Williams, the security guard who had been forced to escort him out 6 months ago, approached with obvious nervousness. "Dr. Grant, I hope it's okay to interrupt. I wanted to thank you for what you did, not just for the university, but for people like me who work here." Dr. Grant extended his hand, which Officer Williams shook gratefully. "Thank you for speaking up during the investigation, Officer Williams. Your testimony about how uncomfortable you felt during that incident was crucial. I've been working campus security for 12 years. Officer Williams said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "I've seen too many incidents like that one, and I always felt powerless to do anything about it. But you changed that. Now we have real protocols, real training, and real accountability." The changes in campus security had been comprehensive. All officers now received extensive bias training, and clear guidelines had been established for when and how to intervene in potential discrimination situations. More importantly, officers were empowered to report incidents up the chain of command without fear of retaliation. As they spoke, Dr. Grant noticed a small ceremony taking place near the main entrance. A bronze plaque was being installed, and a small crowd had gathered to witness the unveiling. Dr. Hamilton approached, his face beaming with pride. "Dr. Grant, we'd like you to see this," he said, leading the way to the ceremony. The plaque, beautifully crafted and prominently placed, read, "The Grant Center for Innovation and Equity. Established 2025. Sometimes you have to be treated like nothing to remind them who built everything." Dr. Elijah Grant, chairman of the board. The crowd applauded as Dr. Grant stood before the plaque, his words from that transformative day now immortalized in bronze. But what moved him most wasn't the recognition, it was seeing the faces in the crowd. Students, faculty, and staff from every background united in their commitment to the values the center represented. "Dr. Grant," a young voice called out. He turned to see Marcus Thompson, a freshman who had been one of the first students accepted into the redesigned program. "I wanted you to know that I almost didn't apply to Whitmore. My older brother told me it wasn't a place for people like us. But after hearing about what you did, about the changes you made, I knew I had to be here." The ripple effects of that day continued to spread. Other universities had reached out to Dr. Grant, asking for guidance in addressing their own diversity challenges. The Grant Center's model was being replicated across the country, and the technology platform his company had developed was now being used by over 50 institutions. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the one Dr. Grant witnessed as he walked through the campus. Students no longer looked at him with suspicion or surprise. Faculty members approached him with genuine respect and collaboration. The atmosphere had shifted from one of exclusion to one of authentic welcome. As the day ended, Dr. Grant found himself back in the same classroom where he'd been humiliated 6 months earlier. But now it was filled with the sounds of engaged learning, diverse voices sharing ideas, and the kind of intellectual energy that comes from a truly inclusive environment. A young professor, Dr. Sarah Martinez, who had been hired as part of the new initiative, approached him with a tablet showing the day's feedback scores. "Dr. Grant, today's session scored a perfect 5.0 from all participants." One student wrote, "For the first time in my academic career, I feel like my voice matters and my ideas are valued." Dr. Grant smiled, remembering his own words from that transformative day. "Sometimes you have to be treated like nothing to remind them who built everything. But more than that, sometimes you have to tear down broken systems to build something better, something that works for everyone." The transformation was complete, but the work continued. Because real change isn't just about a single moment of justice, it's about creating systems that ensure justice becomes the norm, not the exception. And as Dr. Grant walked across the campus, he now proudly called home. He knew that his greatest achievement wasn't the technology he'd developed or the wealth he'd accumulated. It was the knowledge that no student would ever again feel unwelcome in a place designed to help them succeed. The revolution had begun, with one man's refusal to accept discrimination. It had become a movement that would transform higher education for generations to come. And that's how one moment of discrimination became a revolution that changed higher education forever. Dr. Elijah Grant didn't just get revenge. He created a legacy that will protect countless students for generations to come. The diversity program that once pushed away the very people it was meant to help is now a model being copied by universities across the nation. Students like Keisha Williams, who almost dropped out because she felt unwelcome, are now launching successful startups with full scholarship support. The security officer who was forced to escort Dr. Grant out now works in an environment where discrimination is met with immediate consequences, not silence. But here's the most powerful part of this story. It's happening right now at institutions everywhere. Students, employees, and visitors are still being judged by their appearance instead of their character. The difference is that now we have proof that change is possible when the right person has the courage to stand up and the power to make it stick. Dr. Grant's bronze plaque still hangs in that lobby today with his immortal words. Sometimes you have to be treated like nothing to remind them who built everything. But the real monument isn't made of bronze, it's made of transformed lives, equal opportunities, and a campus where everyone truly belongs. If this story moved you, if you've ever been underestimated because of how you look, or if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because we bring you real stories of justice, transformation, and people who refuse to accept discrimination. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when ordinary people do extraordinary things to change the world. And drop a comment telling us about a time when someone underestimated you. Your story matters, and this community wants to hear it. Justice isn't just a concept, it's a choice we make every single day. And sometimes it takes just one person with the courage to say enough to change everything for everyone who comes after.